Rodman's been building fishers on the Atlantic coast of northern Spain for nearly 50 years now. It's developed a very deserved reputation for tough offshore boats that can handle the big seas you get around there. But its modern fleet to some can seem a little bit confusing. For a start, at the entry point we've got the Ventura outboard powered sports boats. Then we've got the Spirit sports cruisers from around about 30 to 40 feet. Above that we've got the Muse motor yachts, and then we've got a kind of spattering of fishers. So what the evolution is all about is more than just the name evolution. This is an evolution of what it is to be a fisher in the Rodman fleet. These modern fishers, these evolution fishers, in line with the 1090, this is the 1290, they both aim to take the traditional Rodman fisher and make it much more usable for the modern family cruiser. She really does perform. She's very agile. But yeah, that's a fun boat to drive, there's no two ways about that. Now it's called the Evolution, not the Revolution, so as you would expect, and actually as you would hope, Rodman hasn't reinvented the wheel. What it's used here is a hull from the existing 1250, and I say the existing 1250, that's actually been a boat that they've been producing since the 90s, so it's thoroughly well proven with shaft drives and with IPS drives. A proper offshore fishing hull with a relatively fine entry and a prodigious bow flare. But in order to make it more appropriate for cruising, well, what do you want? You want space, you want light, you want views, so you need windows. The original hull didn't have those, so they factored those in here. This big panel along the side is in fact a forward window and then a smaller aft window with a blacked out section in the centre, and that's mirrored on the other side. And in order to fit those windows to this hull, they've had to elevate the hull sides to produce a bit more fiberglass above those windows. So we have relatively raised hull sides, and cleverly they've mimicked that on the inside with raised side decks. So not only does that give you the light and the views, it also gives you extra volume for that cruising imperative down below. When you step on board, one of the first and most obvious elements of the fishing heritage involves this cockpit. We've got a 14-foot beam here, well 13-foot 10, but pretty huge, and it's used for an enormous open plan cockpit that's very fishing friendly. That's specced with a nice big deep bait well aft. If you're not into fishing, just use that for your lines, any wet gear, because it's obviously drained. We also have rod holders in the gunnel tops here, as well as cleats on the inside that operate through these nice robust stainless steel fair leads to keep your deck clear of lines so you don't trip while you're trying to fish. We also have these fold down benches, one on either side, and you can also spec one on that transom as well. Again, that's so you can take a seat, but when you're fishing you can fold them up and get on with the business of the day. And we also have an additional bait well and sink just here beneath the steps to the Flybridge. But this is also, as I say, very much a leisure boat. It's very much a cruising boat. So there's plenty of evidence of changes on board that lend this boat to exactly that kind of application. For instance, this can be spec'd instead of a bait well as a barbecue, and then you can use steps that fold up flush with the roof of the Flybridge there. On previous models this was a single door here, but now it's a three-part sliding door, which means that you can open it right up wide here to integrate inside and outside much better, and you can also slide this across so that you can make the port donette much more open plan and al fresco, so that's a nice touch as well. And as we make our way to the swim platform aft, you'll see it's a big unbroken swim platform. You can also spec this as a high-low platform, and you can use fixtures and fittings that enable you to strap a tender to this. But we also have a very neat little swim ladder built into the back end here in the centre, with a couple of little, as you can see, cow horns they call these, and it means that when you're climbing out of the water you're not flailing around trying to grab stuff on the deck, and you're not tripping over stuff that's been built into the deck to enable you to get out. So these pop straight out and enable you to climb out very, very easily. those cruise-friendly features continue as we move forward, and they start here with this aft step. Now, if we look at this side deck, you'll see that it slopes upwards towards the bow. Now, that was always the case, even on the previous 1250, but what that 1250 lacked with this additional step, that's about 7 inches, so that elevates the entire forward section by about 7 inches over that 1250, creating lots of extra interior volume down below. And as we step onto that side deck, you'll see we have these tremendously elevated guardrails on the gunnel tops here, and these aren't simply screwed in to the fiberglass. These are different. We've got bolts, they're bolted in from underneath, and that makes them quite slick and quite pretty. Down on the deck itself, we've got the outlets for the diesel, we've got the gas locker, and we've got the waste outlet. I'd like to see these recessed into their own little drained fiberglass troughs so that you're not spilling any diesel on your decking, though this is flexi teak rather than real teak, so it's a lot more resistant to that sort of thing. And as we move forward again, you'll see that the side windows here for this pilot house, one piece on the sides until you get right up to the helm. Now the stanchions are narrow, and this kind of pilot house is kind of an American style, very upright pilot house, so it gives you big views, lots of light. And it's the same story when you see the screen there, a one-piece screen wraps right around there for fantastic all-round views. And up at this bow space, even though we've got raised decks and we've got that raised hull shape forward, we've still got tremendous security. I mean, that comes right up to the top of my hip there, so it's very safe feeling indeed. And while there are currently no cushions in evidence up here, this moulding on the foredeck here with the big skylights to give you lots of natural light down below, they can be fitted with cushions, and there are 3, so you can omit the central one, so you continue to get lots of light down below even when you've got a couple of sunbeds laid out here. The options on this boat are pretty interesting too, actually, particularly from the perspective of a cruise boater, particularly a Mediterranean cruise boater. Now, obviously this is the Flybridge model, but you can spec this boat with a hard top, and in that configuration it comes with a pair of aft skylights and an enormous forward sunroof. But that sunroof coming from Webasto is quite an expensive piece of kit. So actually the Flybridge option costs only £6,000 more than the hardtop option. Needless to say then that no customer in the UK has yet bought one without a Flybridge, so it's probably best that we go up and take a look at what that extra £6,000 buys you. And when you get up onto this Flybridge, it's not huge, but it's very nicely arranged, and it's all arranged around a helm that's positioned a long way aft and on the starboard side, and that makes loads of sense. I mean, as a boat with a lot of fishing heritage behind it, often when you're up on the Flybridge, you need to be able to spot the guys holding the rods on that aft deck when you're going astern and doing what they need, so they can keep hold of their the big catch. So this is a great position for that. You can also, of course, see the entire starboard side, and because the lower helm is on the port side with its own skipper's door, it means that you can pick the helm that gives you the easiest parking manoeuvre when you come back into the marina. So that's a lovely touch. Now, in terms of the rest of the space, there's a good spot just aft of these twin helm seats for a life raft, but you can also apparently spec this as a barbecue, so you can cook yourself some food and entertain your guests up here. And we have a forward sunbathing platform with a drop-in table amongst these forward seats that enables you to do that and entertain your guests. But the helm itself is actually quite an interesting position to be in, because you look at the dash and you think, well, there's a decent bit of space. There's space for a couple of 12-inch plotters should you want them, and your joystick control, your twin throttles, your compass and the engine displays, plus your trim tabs. But you'll notice there's no evidence of any bow thrusters. And the reason for that is that this boat is spec'd with IPS drives, and there's a relatively broad beam, so there's props at a decent distance apart. So according to the guys at Rodman, and in fact pretty much every Rodman customer, a bow thruster is surplus to requirements, even on a boat like this with fairly substantial windage. Another good option on this boat, which is actually classically Rodman, is the choice between shaft drives or IPS drives. Now in terms of IPS drives, you can have a D6 500, 600 or 650 for 30, 33 or around about 38, 39 knots. We've got the mid-range kind of 600s here, twin 440s, and obviously as IPS drives, they're beneath that aft cockpit, which means that this forward space beneath the saloon, which would otherwise be filled with engines for your shaft drives, is a nice big empty space. Well, I say empty, not quite empty. For a start, we've got absolutely colossal stringers that really remind you how well built these Rodman boats are. We've also got a big water tank, 400 litre water tank. That tells you how serious they are about making cruising easy for their customers. We also have the waste tank to starboard. We have the hot water tank to port. We've got the fuel tank, 1400 litres, just after this space, between this space and that aft engine space where the IPS drives are sitting, and that's 1400 litres, and that's bang in the centre, exactly where you'd want that weight. We've got an enormous distribution panel here with manual emergency battery switches to supplement those that are up on the helm. And we've got some lovely and very expensive master vault equipment, so it is beautifully fitted out. There's lots of space here too. They've actually been asked on a couple of occasions to fit washing machines down here. Apparently they can do that, but a more conventional kind of request involves your seakeeper or your generator, and there's all kinds of space for that. In terms of the engine choice on this particular boat with its IPS drives and the D6 600s, they look relatively snug in this aft space, but you do get big long fiberglass trays on both sides of this aft cockpit for storing things like your fenders, and they come with straps, as you can see, at both ends. It takes two men to lift it out, but you can lift it out, and then you can get better access for maintenance and servicing on both sides. Now you could of course save a decent wedge of money by going for shaft drives instead of IPS. But of course, with a boat like this, you would probably then need to spend a little bit of extra money in getting yourself a bow thruster to compensate, because of course you don't get that same intuitive control as you can enjoy with IPS joystick control. Step into the saloon and it's immediately very impressive. I mean, for a start, unlike the 1250, we've got a galley up configuration, and it's an impressive galley. Considerably more than a wet bar. On this particular boat we've got a couple of gas rings and a sink. Now you can spec this electric or gas, and you can have 2 or 3 rings there. We've also got a little oven down below there, plus additional storage for bottles and glasses, and a lovely big work surface with a television that lifts up out of there at the press of a button incidentally which I cannot find, so I can't illustrate that. But this is nice. We also have a big fridge built into this section, and it's not just an afterthought. It's not like they've just grabbed an off-the-shelf fridge and whacked it into a space beneath a work surface. It feels like this entire thing has been built specifically with that fridge in mind. It's very slick, very clean, and actually the timber itself is very nice. It feels very authentic, very organic. It's actually marine ply, and what we have here is a teak veneer, but you can also have mahogany or oak veneers on this marine ply, whatever you fancy, and at no extra cost. So across from the galley we have a dinette, a C-shaped dinette, as you would expect, perfectly placed with good companionways actually. Again, we're really taking advantage of that generous beam. Big side decks, but also big companionways all the way through this pilot house. And we've got storage underneath these various seats, and we also, as you would expect, have a table that can be dropped down into that space manually rather than electrically. And then you can fill the infills and use this as an additional double berth. It's a shame actually that they haven't thought to use these backrest cushions as the infills. These don't fit, so what you have is a dedicated infill cushion that has to be stored elsewhere, which is a bit of an oversight. I'd like to see them use those backrests so that it's a much more simple process and you have them directly to hand without wasting any of your storage. But headroom is as impressive as it looks from the outside, and so is the light and the views through these big one-piece side windows. And when we step up to the helm, It's quite an unusual setup here. We've got two helm seats, of course, the Helm and the co-pilot, with that side door, which again is a very useful touch and a nice development over the 1250. And on the starboard side we have a kind of inward facing bench for two, which is quite nice. We've got a chart table forward. I'm not sure too many people will use it as that, but it does double as a very nice place to pop your glass of wine. And this is actually a very sociable spot, whether you're underway or parked up. It enables you to face across to the people at the helm or to face across to the people on that after net and relax and take in the view. It's quite a relaxing spot. But you can, if you wish, have a more traditional setup, turn this around and have two forward facing seats instead. Step down below and things are very simple and easy to understand. We have the master suite in the bow. We have a mid cabin that's L-shaped and wraps around beneath that elevated helm section. And we have a heads compartment with separate shower to starboard. But if we start with this forward cabin, this enjoys that elevated foredeck moulding, and because we've got the raised hull sides, even though it's relatively bulbous, it looks quite low profile. It's quite a cool looking boat. We get plenty of light from those big windows up above. We also get excellent views of the horizon from bed level, plus opening portholes for ventilation. And again, the storage, as elsewhere on this boat, is extremely good. Little cubby holes up at the head end of the bed by your reading lights. We've also got little shelving units on both sides for things you want immediately to hand, and on both sides we have a couple of charging points for 240 volt and for your USBs. If I move a little further aft, you'll see we've also got storage built in beneath this elevated bed. A couple of drawer units here which pull out, but of course because we've got IPS drives and we don't need that bow thruster, we've also got a decent bit of space beneath the bed up there in the depths of the hull. So if we lift this up, you'll see the mattress itself is hinged in the centre, which gives you access to these little spaces here. I say little spaces, the apertures are relatively compact, and it's good to see actually they've used quite a lightweight plastic rather than fiberglass, so this is very easy to handle one-handed. It's not weighty like a lot of them tend to be. And the space in here runs all the way through to the other side, so it's a very useful addition to the storage spaces we have elsewhere. And if I show you those storage spaces, you're likely to be fairly impressed, I think. We have hanging storage on both sides, symmetrical layout here. And to help with your hanging storage, we have little sliding brackets, so you can slide your gear out and a little light to turn on there. So that's a nice little touch. I mean, it's not attempting to be Princess or Sunseeker in terms of the calibre of the fixtures and fittings, the quality of the finish, but it's pretty nicely done, very serviceable and very practical for cruisers, as so much of this boat seems to be. Now, if we move out of here and into the mid cabin, you'll see that we also have a surprising amount of space in here, and it all starts with this changing area. Now, this takes advantage of the helm station, the port helm, which is pretty much directly above us here. So standing headroom, when I take a step down here, I mean it's enormous. It's in excess of 7 feet, I would have thought. We also have an opening porthole plus the aft of those two hull windows that we spoke about earlier. Again, really lovely views from bed level. You can see the horizon. They're lovely. Really good size, that. We have curtains rather than blinds down here. I prefer blinds, I just find them fresher and more modern. But it's perfectly well fitted out. Again, we have nice little storage spaces and a couple of charging points for this single bed. And we have another single bed, transverse, beneath the saloon. And here, you'll notice, we have the infill for that third double berth up in that saloon, that convertible dinette, which really shouldn't have to rattle around. But there we are. It's as good a place as any to store it. And this L-shape layout, which we see in a kind of mutated form on the 1090, is a very effective way to use this space while still freeing up plenty of room on that starboard side, now that we have the galley up top for a proper heads compartment with a separate shower. And actually, one more thing I want to mention before we nip back up top is a design feature over here in this starboard heads compartment. We've got the toilet neatly tucked around the back of the door, which makes decent sense in terms of use of space. But what's even more impressive is this. We've got the mixer tap up on the ceiling instead of on the wall, which means you don't accidentally knock it in a relatively confined space and turn up the temperature when you least want it. Up at the helm, one of the key new features that we have here is this skipper's side door. Let me just unbolt that. It's not especially wide, but it's plenty wide enough for you to step onto that side deck, keeping hold of the wheel, grabbing hold of a rail, see forward, see aft, and also they've positioned the joystick specifically so it's easy to reach here on the left hand side of this dash top, which is a nice little touch. So that's very well arranged. What's less well arranged is the fact that they pop the trim tabs down here when ideally you'd want it for your right hand, and there's plenty of dash space up here next to your throttle to position that there. Well, that's factory fitted, so the guys here at RBS Marine are fully aware that it would be better to position it up here. So if they have anything to do with it, I'm certain on subsequent models that will happen. In other regards, the dash provides plenty of space. We've got a single 12-inch chart plotter here, but there's room for 2 or even 2 16 inches if you want them. We've also got the Volvo Penta engine display there, the twin throttles. We've got a little bar of buttons here. They're your switches for your batteries, and next to that we have a remote control for the spotlights up on the roof here of the pilot house. We also have a little bracket for the remote for that those spotlights just here, so you can fit the remote down in there so you don't lose it. Plus your VHF and stereo to hand on the lower side, just out of the way of the main section of the dash. We also have a couple of other bits. We've got a Webasto remote control here, so you can control your heating from the dash, as well as a couple of USB chargers. So it's pretty well spec'd, but not at all cluttered. And the seats are pretty good too. They've got these fold down armrests, a pair of proper seats with proper bolsters. And although there's no adjustability built into these particular ones here on this test boat, that's because this has been bought by a guy who didn't actually want it. He found that this natural position was perfect for him in any regard. But there's a bit of leeway both on the back of that and the forward section of this moulding for you to fit runners, so you could slide those fore and aft. And there's also the adjustable wheel, so it's a pretty comfortable position. And even as we're sitting here, you know, pretty much at idle out on the water, the doors are open, the aft door's open, but even with those 2 D6s running, it's pretty quiet. We're registering about 76 to 79 decibels, and that's with me chatting away at the helm, so it's very, very quiet indeed. Let's get ourselves up and running and have a little play. Now, one thing to notice right from the off as I'm checking the horizon to make sure we're not getting in anybody's way is the fact that with the Flybridge and the skipper's door, there's some big mullions here, and from this angle here, because I'm not sitting in the centre, they're more of a kind of acute angle. There's very little visibility through this section, so I actually have to pop my head out and have a little look before I get underway. That aside though, the one-piece screen and the one-piece windows on the side, the visibility elsewhere is very good. And I've already had a little drive of this boat, so I know, as you can see, I know that the pickup is surprisingly urgent. We're planing at 20 knots within about 6 seconds. Now, I've talked a lot about how this boat lends itself to cruising, and if I ease back the pace a little to around about 24 knots, 25 knots, at 25 knots you'll see that we've got fuel flow combined from those engines of 100 litres per hour. So that equates to 4 litres per nautical mile, which is very sustainable. And because we've got a 1400 litre fuel tank here, even with a good margin for error left in that tank, we should have a usable range of around about 270 nautical miles. And that's seriously long-legged. So we scoot past 30 knots from 0 in about 14 seconds. Push on again. Past 30 knots to around about 33. The most we've had this morning is 36 knots. And let's not forget, this is a 41-foot hull. This is 43 feet including the swim platform. It weighs about 12 metric tons. And that 1,400 litre fuel tank, well, that's full. So that's in excess of another metric ton. Plus the water tank's full too, that's another 400 kilos. So we're heavily loaded. So 36 knots is a pretty good return. And even at the top end, we're still hovering at very refined decibel levels. It's very easy just to chat. You don't have to raise your voice at all. And that's all fantastic. But what's really surprising is when you fancy having a little play with this boat, she really does perform. She's very agile. If I throw her into a turn to starboard, she bangs right in, heels right over. Powers round. Really settled, really relaxed. And we actually haven't dropped even half a knot off that speed. That's very impressive indeed. We'll have another turn around to port once we've gone past these boats and this buoy. But what I like about this boat is not just the angle that it heels into, the fact that it feels like quite a game little driver's boat. It's just the fact that it feels smaller than it is. It doesn't feel like 12 metric tons. It doesn't feel like 43 feet. It doesn't feel like a Flybridge cruiser. You don't feel like you've got too much weight up top. And actually it doesn't feel like a fishing boat. It doesn't feel like a fisher. It is that. That's exactly what it is. It's a Rodman fisher. But this evolution form of Rodman fisher feels a lot more refined than that. In terms of the fixtures and the fit out, in terms of its cruising credentials, its manners, in terms of the way it looks after you at the helm. But yeah, that's a fun boat to drive. There's no two ways about that. An entertaining boat to drive. And you've got to bear in mind that although this tops out around about 36 knots for us today, and they quote around about 33 to 34 knots with these D6 600s, well, the 650s are also available. And that'll give you a little bit of extra grunt, and they're quoting around about 39, 40 knots for that. And I have to say, having had a concerted drive of this boat this morning, it feels like it could very much handle that. In fact, not just handle it, but relish it. For me then, this new Rodman 1290 Evolution strikes a really impressive balance. It's still a proper fishing boat, and with this hull, it was always going to be. This hull has been thoroughly proven on the 1250 since the late 90s with that enormous bow flare and soft entry, but it also has these deep, wide side decks and the huge elevated guardrails. It has that massive cockpit aft, wide open, so you can use it for fishing, or, you know, if cruising's more your thing, you can just fill it with freestanding deck furniture. And if cruising is your thing, well, this boat's beautifully set up. We've got the two cabins down below. We've got the separate heads with the separate shower. Up here we've got this impressive galley up configuration, and we also have a proper dinette here that turns into a genuine double bed, and you don't just get the privacy of blinds on the side windows. We've also got dedicated window covers on both sides, plus all the way around that one-piece screen. So when you're cruising and you're in a marina, you get a proper private double berth to add to the two down there. So that's 6 people can sleep on this boat without a problem at all. And the whole point of this boat, the Evolution range, and the whole beauty of modern Rodman is that you can tweak that balance in whichever way you choose. If you're a keen cruiser, tweak it that way. And if you're a keen fisherman, tweak it that way. It goes from £500,000, including VAT for the base model. For this test boat, you're looking at about £600,000, including VAT. But whichever way you choose to configure this boat, it's a hell of a lot of boat for the money, and a great way to factor extra versatility into your boating.